The mental argument that Allah does not resemble the creations is that we indeed assert. It means we claim, we assert, but this is a correct assertion. When two things are similar, then whatever is possible for one is possible for the other. That's the foundation for arguing the dissimilarity for God. In Al-Bukhari, a man came to the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alayhi wasallam saying, Ya Nabi Allah, inna mra'ati waladat ghulaman aswad wa arrada li nafyih. O Prophet of Allah, indeed, my wife gave birth to a black child, and he was hinting at denying the child. فقال النبي صلى الله عليه وآله وسلم. And so the Prophet said, alayhi salatu wassalam, هل لك من إبل? Do you have any camels? فقال نعم. The man said yes. قال ما ألوانها? The Messenger of Allah sallallahu alayhi wasallam said, what color are they? قال حمر. The man said, red. فقال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وآله وسلم. And so the Messenger of Allah said, alayhi salatu wassalam, هل فيها من أورق? Are any of them أورق? Whitish, leaning toward black, like a pigeon? قال نعم. The man said, yes. إن فيها أورق. Some are indeed أورق. قال فأنا ذلك. The Messenger sallallahu alayhi wasallam said, how is that? قال لعل عرقا نزعه. The man said, perhaps it was ancestry. More literally, it's like perhaps a vein brought him out. قال ولعل ولدك نزعه عرق. The Messenger said, sallallahu alayhi wasallam, perhaps this child of yours has been brought out by ancestry. This hadith shows that two similar things can have the same attribute. The human and the camel are both bodies and both have colors. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam showed the possibility of what happened to the offspring of one to the other. Yani, happening to the other. He showed the possibility of what happened to the offspring of one happening to the other. Hence, if Allah were like the creation, he would be susceptible to the same things they are. Consequently, had he been attributed with any attribute of the creatures, he could possibly have every attribute of the creatures. That's an argument. Had he had any attribute of the creatures, he could have every attribute of the creatures. He posed that in a discussion. And then someone would get it, and he will be astonished. And then someone won't get it, and he won't even know what you're talking about. Like change, development, sickness, and destruction. Then it would be possible that the sun and moon be God, or even a pole. Your pole on the train. You see what they do in those movies, they will depict anything as so-called God. Hippopotamus and alligator and skeleton. Had he resembled the creation, he would need a specifier. If he has a specifier, then he is needy, and this is misguidance. Yani, that's an argument too there. Had he resembled the creation, he would need a specifier, but that might need clarity. If he has a specifier, then he is needy. And this is misguidance to believe that God is needy. Then this specifier would make him resemble all creations or some creations. Now you might say he specified himself. Then that would mean he created himself, and that's impossible. Yani, there's no third option mentally. That's how you make an ilzam. Ilzam, that means a binding argument. Yani, an inescapable argument. You have to pose it in a way that you eliminate all options, all other options. Then you will have an inescapable argument. Then, yani, like here, then this specifier would make him resemble all creations or some. There's no other option here. So you're then on the verge of an ilzam. If he resembled all, he would have an independent existence for resembling particles and bodies, and a dependent existence for resembling characteristics. That's all right there. All creations. That's the summation of all creations, as you know already. Things that have volume and the characteristics of those things. Things that have volume are two types: particles, single particles, and bodies that are made of those particles. And there are two types: either they're dense, that means tangible, or intangible, like the light. So that's all the creations: single particles and bodies made of those particles. These things with volume would either be tangible or intangible. And what's left after that is the qualities of these things that have volume. That's all the creations. So if he resembled all the creations, he would have an independent existence for resembling particles and bodies, whether they're tangible or not. And he would, at the same time, have a dependent existence for resembling characteristics. Because as you know, because you've been studying, inshallah, characteristics exist through things that have volume. They don't have an independent existence. If you have any question here, make sure you ask, please. Because maybe some of what I'm saying is uh, advanced for some people. At the same time, though, we are continuing. Yani, all our lessons are built on previous lessons. So that's why you have to stay in attendance and you have to study. So, characteristics are the things that don't exist independently, like motion and stillness. Motion exists through a body, and stillness exists through a body or a particle, and other characteristics like that, like knowledge. Knowledge exists through a knowledgeable one, a body. Yani, talk about creations now. Created knowledge, I'm talking about. Doesn't exist by itself. It won't just be a knowledge floating around somewhere. So characteristics are what have a dependent existence. They don't exist independently. They exist through something else, which is they exist through particles and bodies. So if Allah resembled all the creations, he would have an independent existence for resembling particles and bodies. And at the same time, he would have a dependent existence for resembling characteristics. Thus, he would simultaneously be existing dependently yet independently. And it is impossible that what has an autonomous existence, an independent existence, would not have an independent existence. It's impossible that something that has an independent existence does not have an independent existence. Is that clear? What's unclear for you? Okay, so follow me here. I'm going to ask you and you answer me. We're saying that Allah does not resemble the creations, right? That's what we want to argue, right? Okay. So we're saying if he resembles the creations, then either he resembles all of them or he resembles some of them. Is that clear? Okay. So we started at the first one. We didn't get to the second one yet. The first one is that he would resemble all of them. So if he resembles all of them, that means he resembles what has an independent existence and at the same time what has a dependent existence. He would be like both of them at the same time. And it's impossible that something that has an independent existence would not have an independent existence. Is that clear? Okay. So he can't resemble all of them. If he resembled all of them, he would have an independent existence and at the same time a dependent existence. Because some creations have independent existence and some creations have a dependent existence. Independent means independent of another creation. Like my laptop is independent of my phone. They are two different independently existing things. So it's impossible that what has an independent existence does not have an independent existence. It's mentally impossible. It's rationally absurd. So then it's irrational to say that God resembles all the creations. So then the only thing left is that he would resemble some of them. So if he resembled only some creations, then whatever he resembled would have a volume or would be a characteristic. Because all the creations either is something that has a volume or it's a characteristic. Air is a body that has a volume. Volume means takes up space. Air is an intangible body. You can't grab it with your hand. So if he resembles some of the creation, it's one of these two. So, yani, either he's going to be resembling something with volume that takes up space or a characteristic. So if he resembles a characteristic, he would resemble all of them or some of them, right? There's nothing left. So if he resembles all the characteristics, then he would be like all contradictory qualities. He would have been black and white, and life and death, and hot and cold, etc. And if he resembles any characteristic whatsoever, he would not have an independent existence. He would have a dependent existence no matter what. If he resembles any characteristic, as said, then if he does not have an independent existence, then he would need a sight through which to be confirmed. Yani, he would need a body to exist through it or a particle. But then, if that were the case, then that sight, that body through which he exists, would be more deserving of being God than him. Because the sight is stronger than the characteristic. The sight can exist independently, the characteristic cannot exist independently. The body or the particle can exist independently. So it's stronger than the quality that cannot exist independently. Clear so far? But don't ask me about something I didn't say so that you stay focused. Focus with me. Now, we already talked about if he resembles all the creations, what would that lead to? So that's absurd. So then what's left is that he would resemble some creations. So if he resembles some creations, then either he resembles something that has volume, that's a body or a particle, or he resembles a characteristic. That's clear? Okay. So let's start with the characteristic. So if he resembles a characteristic, either he resembles all of the characteristics or he resembles some of them. There's nothing left. So if he resembles all of them, then he would be like all the contradictory qualities. He would have been black and white and life and death and hot and cold, etc. Is that clear? If he resembles any characteristic, yani some of them, any one of them, then he would not have an independent existence because that's the case of any characteristic. A characteristic, a created attribute is what? Is something that does not exist independently. It must exist through something with volume. Then, if he were like that, if he didn't have an independent existence, he would need a sight through which to be confirmed. That means he would need a body or he would need a particle to exist through it so that because he doesn't have his own independent existence, so then he would need something with volume so he could exist. But then if that were the case, then that thing with volume, that body for example, would have been more deserving of being God than him because the body, the sight through which this characteristic is existing is stronger than the characteristic itself because the body can exist independently. The body can fill a space by itself, but a characteristic doesn't fill a space by itself. The characteristic exists through something that fills a space. So then, if Allah were like a characteristic, he would need something through which to exist. Is that clear? Furthermore, among the conditions for being the creator is to be alive and knowledgeable and powerful and willing. Yani the creator has to have attributes. Creator means he creates. If he creates, that means he does something. If he does something, which is his creating, that means he has power and will and knowledge. And if he has power and will and knowledge, then he's alive. And it is impossible that a characteristic would have such a description. A mere characteristic? Characteristic cannot be alive and knowledgeable and powerful and willing and doing something. So it is impossible that Allah resembles any characteristics. Is that clear? Alhamdulillah. So then what about things that have volume? So what did we say? We said, here's the argument. We said, if he resembles the creations, then he resembles all of them or some of them. If he resembles all of them, we handled that. And that's absurd. So if he resembles some of them, He would either resemble a characteristic or he would have a volume, means he would be a particle or a body. So we dealt with the characteristic. If he resembles characteristics, then either he resembles all of them or some of them. Either way, it's absurd. We finished with that. So what's left? Then he would resemble something that has volume. Had he resembled all of the bodies, he would simultaneously be dense and subtle. That means tangible and intangible. If he resembled all bodies, then he would resemble the tangible ones and the intangible ones. So he would be tangible and intangible at the same time, and that's impossible. And if he resembled any body whatsoever, then he would necessarily have the judgment of any body. He would have to have the judgment of any body. And no body is devoid of, is lacking events that alternate on it, that switch on it. That means like moving and then being still, and then moving and then being still. Everybody is like this. Either it's always moving, or it's always still, or sometimes moving and sometimes still. Then there's nothing left. So if he were a body, if he were any body, if he resembled any body whatsoever, then he would have to have the judgment of any body. And every body has some judgments. Like what? Like moving or being still. There's nothing left. Either it's moving or it's still. There's nothing left. Or it's touching something or it's separate from something. It's either touching or separate. It's in contact or it's away. Every body is like that, either in contact with something or away from something. There's no third option. So every body has certain qualities that alternate on it, switch on it. Or at the least, if it's always moving, it could be still. Or if it's always still, it could be moving. Some things are just still and they don't move. Some things Allah created like that. Some things Allah created, they are always moving and they're never still. And some things Allah created, sometimes moving and sometimes still. And the things that are always moving, they could be still. And the things that are always still, they could be moving. So these are events, being still and moving, coming and going and touching and separating. Those are events. Those are things happening. These events are alternating on the body, switching, coming and going. Then it would be necessary for Allah to be what? A vessel for alternating events, like us. We are vessels for alternating events, switching qualities. So what we're saying is bodies like ourselves are vessels, containers for switching things, switching events. Yani, because sometimes we're moving and sometimes we're still. So isn't that switching? Isn't that alternating? If you move and then you're still, and then you move again, and then you're still, and then you move, and then you're still. So then we are vessels for alternating events. We are sites. You are a site, a location for events that are coming and going, that are happening. You are a site and I am a site for events. So event means what? Event means created. Event means created because created means to have a beginning. An event means to happen, and happen means to have a beginning. Is what I'm saying clear? Okay. So, had Allah been like any body, then this would have been his case. He would have been like what I'm describing to you now. Is it clear? Now, had Allah Ta'ala been a body, had he been like any body, he would have had the judgment of any body. And the judgment of any body is that it has alternating qualities, qualities that switch, that alternate. The word alternate is important here. That means they come and go, they replace each other, they switch on each other. Four in particular are very easy to understand: moving and being still, touching and not touching. Those switch. When moving comes, being still goes away. When being still comes, moving goes away. When touching comes, being away goes away. When you move away, then touching goes away. That's alternating on something, which is a vessel for these qualities that are alternating, a site, a location for these events that are happening, these creations that are starting and stopping. Had Allah been like anybody, he would have been such a location for these creations that are coming and going and switching and starting and stopping. That would mean he's created. Whatever is not devoid of events does not precede them. Uh, some of these words might be heavy also. That's why I want you to pay attention. And some of these arguments you might not be used to uh, processing them. So you need to process them. You soak them in. What you should really do is memorize them just as they are. Don't change them. Like if you are taking notes from what I am presenting to you, and there's my screen right there, so you could be getting it exactly like it's written there. Don't change it and then memorize it just like it is. Then it will soak into your heart well. As you memorize it, it will soak in. Then it will blossom. It will open up and you will understand very well. Insha'Allah. So here, this next statement, uh, let's try it on for size. What is it? Whatever is not devoid of events does not precede them. What does that mean? It's a very important statement for the one who wants to understand how to argue that God is not like the creations. Whatever is not devoid of events does not precede them. What does devoid mean? It means lacking, not having. Whatever is not devoid of events means whatever must have events, like moving or being still, touching and not touching. It can't get away from that. Like we cannot escape that. Can you escape moving or not moving? There's no way you can get out of that. You cannot be devoid of it. Or touching or not touching. What are you going to do? Get out of your chair, your feet are still on the floor. What are you going to do? Float in the middle of the room? Then you're separate. You're away from something. So whatever is not devoid of events does not precede them. Event means something that happens. An event is something that happens, isn't it? Yeah, Abdul Qawi, do you see that? That event? Yes. So event is something that happens. So something that happens means what? Created. It's created. Because happen means what? Start, right? Happens means it starts. So whatever is not devoid of events, of things that start, things that happen, whatever cannot get away from things happening to it, basically is what that means there. Whatever cannot get away from things happening to it, whatever cannot escape things happening to it, like moving and then being still, yani moving or being still, or touching something or not touching it. Whatever cannot escape something happening to it, then yani whatever is not devoid of events does not precede them. That means if you can't avoid something happening to you, then you can't exist before things happen. You can't exist before something happens. In other words, there's only one who exists before everything happened. Who's the one who existed before everything happened? Who's the one who existed before everything happened? God, Allah Ta'ala. Allah is the one who existed before anything happened. But if you can't exist without something happening, if you can't exist without something happening, then you are yourself something that happened. If you can't exist without something that happened, then you are something that happened. That means you're created. Whatever is not devoid of events does not precede them, does not come before them. Whatever cannot be free of events cannot be existing before events. That's what that statement means. Is that clear? Whatever is not devoid of events means whatever can't exist without something happening does not precede them. Then you cannot exist. Whatever is like that can't exist before happenings. Whatever can't exist without something happening can't exist before happenings. Did you understand that? Okay. And whatever does not precede events, yani whatever can't exist before something happens, is itself an event. Yani is something that happened. It is itself something that happened. Whatever can't exist before something happens is itself something that happened. Subhanallah wa bihamdi. Is that clear? So that means we are all created. If Allah was a body, he would be like that. Had Allah been like any body, he would be like what we're saying now. Is that clear? Let's see if we can squeeze this little paragraph in here. Therefore, since createdness for the eternal is invalid, being created, since the eternal one being created is invalid, yani it's impossible. it is invalid that he resembles anything created. Since it's invalid that the Eternal One is created, then it's invalid that he would resemble anything created. This is why a sun worshipper can refute a Jihawi. A sun worshipper can refute someone who believes Allah is in the sky. When he says that Allah is God in a place above us, the sun worshipper will say that the sun is God in a place above us. However, the sun is seen by everyone and everyone recognizes its benefit. And it's beautiful too. But what you worship, that sun worshiper would say, is a figment of your imagination. And not everyone recognizes its benefit. There are people who deny what you worship, that sun worshiper can say to him. And he can say, you have never seen it, nor has anyone else. The sun worshiper will say to him, you never saw what you worship, he says to the Wahhabi, and nobody else did either. And everything that likener uses as evidence to invalidate the claim of the sun worshiper, any argument that likener, that Wahhabi uses to refute the sun worshiper, invalidates his own creed because he worships a body like the sun worshiper does. Except that he worships an imaginary body and the sun worshiper worships a real body. That's why the sun worshiper will always be able to defeat him. Actually, the likener is unable to establish any definitive evidence against anyone who worships other than Allah. وَسُبْحَانَ اللَّهِ وَبِحَمْدِهِ.